Hello, it's Adedoyin Jaiyesimi here, and welcome to my YouTube channel. This is the second module in the Blueprint of Executive Communications bite-sized comms course, and we're going to be talking about developing an executive communication strategy. We're going to go through the process of developing your executive communication strategy. Then I would also share with you a template, and I'm going to put the link to download that template in the comment section of this video so that you can download it and tweak it and use that for your own executive communication strategy. So you see, this course is fully loaded. All right, so let's get into this module. So this is the overview of the framework. If you've been in my class or you've watched my other bite-sized comms courses, you will see that this is adapted from the strategic communications framework, which is why I always advocate learning or mastering that framework, because you can then apply it to different contexts, different sectors, different disciplines. It is a gift that keeps giving. So again, this is my monthly reminder that please master the strategic communications framework. Learn how to use it, learn how to leverage it to get results, and it would actually make a difference to your communications work. Now, let's look at how this framework plays out in real life. So you have an executive, you start off by profiling that executive, you do an audit, and I'm going to break it down. I'm just going to run through it, and then in the next few slides, we'll then do a deep dive. Then your goals and objectives, you do your audience mapping and segmentation, you have your messaging, your visibility strategy, then you have your content format and your channels, then your sequencing and distribution, then your metrics and KPIs. There must always be metrics and KPIs in everything that we do, because what we do can actually and absolutely should be measured. So let's look at the first step. Profile and audit your executive. You really have to understand the executive. Executives are human beings. I know sometimes we like to think that they're superhuman, some of them, or sometimes people think that the executives are gods, but they're humans. They're humans with habits, they're humans with personalities, they're humans that they're just humans. And so you really have to be able to understand them, to understand what kind of strategy would work, what kind of approach will work. In fact, you have an executive team where you will have different approaches for their executive communication based on their personality, based on their preferences, based on what comes naturally to them, based on their strengths and weaknesses. And so you have to be able to understand that. So your strategic approach and the tactics that you adopt for your executive needs to be aligned with that executive's expertise, that executive's personality and areas of strength. I've said it in the previous model. You do not want to place that executive in a platform or in a situation where their weaknesses are amplified. That's why you need to understand their strengths. Not everybody is great with video, for example. Not every executive is great with handling a platform if they've not been media trained. So for those executives, less video, more of written long form content. So you really have to understand their personality. And then for those of them that have weaknesses, how do we strengthen it so that when we put them on the stage, when we put them in front of the media, it doesn't make things worse? And so here are some key questions that you should answer. What is the executive's personality? Is this person introverted? Is this person extroverted? Do they have a blend of both? Because when you have an executive that is extroverted, they can tend to talk too much. So you have the extroverted executive that they talk a lot, but they are measured in what they say. Like they kind of have a filter. And you have those that they don't have a filter, and that if you don't train them well, it is not the best thing to go and put them in front of an interview or put them in front of a journalist that can be hostile because they can just say anything. I'm sure you've seen examples of CEOs and executives just putting things on like Twitter and X, and you're just like, yeah, grab this person's phone. So you really need to know the executive's personality. What are the strengths of the executive? In what areas does the executive shine or perform best? Is the person a naturally gifted communicator? Well, even if an executive doesn't have communication as their strength, they're shy, they're media averse, those things can be strengthened through training. But it's important to even know where is this person starting from, so that you move them from their zone or level of comfort to where you need them to be in the required steps. So you can't take someone that is media averse and then put them right in the deep end, no training, no guidance, and you expect that they will do well. That's a bit unfair. What are the weaknesses of the executive? In what area does this executive struggle from a communication and perception perspective? So it's very important for you to know all of this. what is the executive's communication style? So when I do media training for executives, for example, or public speaking training, I get them to do a test to really understand their communication style. This video is not about that, but it's important to know, how does this executive naturally communicate? Are they the ones that are very great storytellers? Are they more analytical in their communication style? There's actually like a science to it. So it's important to know, how does this executive naturally communicate and pass on information? How visible does the executive want to be? When sometimes people engage me for media training, we want our executive to start speaking more, I usually always ask, is the executive on board with this, or you're trying to force the executive? Because it makes a total difference in how those sessions go when I have the person's buy-in. And if the person hasn't signed on, I first have to use the first few classes to make them understand why this is important. So if this is something that the executive is nervous about, then you need to actually calm their fears or anxiety. And I've done that successfully, but it's important that you're aware of it if that exists. What is the executive's risk appetite? What concerns do they have? Because that's part of making them feel more comfortable with the idea of being visible on social media. For some, it's not even about the media. They don't want to be on Instagram. They don't want to be on TikTok. They don't want people to start talking about them negatively. I remember an example of an executive that the person was like, look, media interviews, it always seems like the negative headlines or the negative sound bites are put out there, and the person was like, no media interviews. And while the example that particular executive was given was actually true, the reality is, taking a no media stance was also hurting the organization. So it was just finding that balance, but you have to know where they're coming from. What is already in the public domain about the executive? That's part of your audit. Do a thorough review of their content, their posts, what people say. Do they already have a negative perception? Do people think, oh, this person is standoffish? So that we know our starting points. That's actually the reason why it's important to do this profiling and the audit of your executive. And then you begin to craft your executive's focus area. You can't get your executive talk about everything. Today they're talking about the weather. Tomorrow they're talking about industry. Then they're talking about the social political climate. Then they're talking about is a lot. And do you know what some executives are now doing, especially on Instagram? They have their official page. Then they now have their own personal page where they want to share anything, and that page is private, because sometimes maybe they have different interests. But if it's at odds, remember, executive communication is still ties back to the organization. So the executive doesn't have the freedom in that way, as long as they are the CEO or they are part of the leadership of this organization, to do certain things. And so sometimes they create different accounts for that. But as the official spokesperson, or you're the CEO, this is what it is. So you have to say, in this capacity, what exactly will you be saying? And usually that focus area should be tied to their area of expertise. So when people come across your executive online or offline, what do you want them to remember? So you define the vision, you define the values, you define the leadership philosophy. What is the big picture? What is the vision? And this you have to really sit down. So when you are engaging with your executive, you have to ask all of these questions, get answers. What is the big picture? What is the vision? What are the values? What's important to you? So take some of all these questions and break it down so that you can actually get answers that then feeds into your strategy and feeds into the tactics that you use. What is the leadership philosophy of this executive? Because that would also help you in content creation. That would also help you in developing a content strategy that is, unique to them, that is something that they would actually align with and be more comfortable jumping on. So all of this, you need to capture it in your strategy. Next thing is your objective. There has to be a purpose. We are not communicating or doing executive communications just for the sake of doing it. What exactly do we want to achieve? And so you have to set smart objective, and they have to be measurable. How do we know that this is working? How do we know that this is delivering results? And you must please remember, it has to be aligned with the corporate strategy. So always remember your corporate strategy. There needs to be alignment. Whatever it is you're doing for your executive in terms of messaging, in terms of putting out content for them, align it with the overarching corporate strategy. And remember, your executive is a key channel of communication and a core pillar in shaping corporate perception and reputation. So I must see that straight line between what you're doing for your executive in terms of communication and whatever it is that your organization is doing. And if you do it well, that positive reputation, the good vibes that your executive is getting, it will have a ripple effect on the organization. And if you don't do it well, you know what can happen. Step 3, map your audience, right? Stakeholder segmentation and mapping. Your executive cannot speak to everyone. And this, when I'm having strategy sessions with executives, comms teams, are just like, please, we cannot be speaking to everyone. Your executive cannot be speaking to everyone. Not everyone is interested in what your executive has to say. So you have to be clear about who your executive is speaking to. There's so many ways that you can segment your audience, but for the purpose of executive communications, I always like to separate the corporate audience from thought leadership audience. So corporate audience are the ones that are directly tied to the organization. So shareholders, employees, government, regulators, general media, and then other key corporate stakeholders, because the messaging that you will send for these ones will be messaging that really has to tie into the organization. It has a very corporate and organizational focus. Now, the second bucket is thought leadership audience. So those are the ones that the messaging is more of the executive's area of expertise, thematic content, things that align with topics, themes, trends, for example. So you're looking at industry audiences, key audiences in your target markets that are outside of the corporate audience, audiences outside your core market, and then specialist media for that particular industry or thematic area. Step 4, you define your messaging. So all of these audiences, when you've broken them down, and in this sample, I'll show you like the different examples, but I just wanted to talk you through the process, just break it down. Outline what you want each of them to know, feel, and do with regards to communication and content from your executive. And so if you pick the media, what do you want the media to know? What do you want them to feel? What do you want them to do? So you want them to see this executive, for example, as someone they can reach out to for expert opinion on industry topics, on things related to that industry area. So if that executive is in the finance sector, tech sector, if there's a policy or something is happening and they're looking for people to contribute, they're looking for experts to invite, they're thinking of your executive. That's the kind of thing that I mean. So what do you want the executive to be known for? How do you want the executive to be perceived? What should the audience do after interacting with the executive and his or her content? Very, very important. Okay, if they like, if they comment, what exactly is the goal? So you can see why I say that this thing and everything that we do in communications, we really have to be intentional about it. There's strategy. When you are able to answer this question and think thoroughly about it, it really does have an impact on the results that you will get. And you can then further break down your messaging into 2 streams. So you have your overarching core message. This is what it is that we're saying about the executive. And then your target audience messaging. So this is a messaging for the industry. This is a messaging for the government. This is the messaging for this bucket of audience. Again, still aligned with your organizational messaging, but this is about how you want your executive to be known, how you want your executive to be perceived, what exactly your executive will be saying, and then you can build themes and topics. And there's so much. You'll find that there's so much that you can do once you are able to identify some of these things. And then step 5, you have your visibility strategy. So this is where you then decide the strategic approach you would use to project your executive to increase visibility. For executives, the top 3 is 1, your thought leadership strategy. And thought leadership is where you're positioning the executive as a credible voice and authority within an industry or sector or area of expertise. This usually combines both digital and non-digital tactics. So social media, and then you offline, the events they go for, speaking engagement, all of that. So it has to be a combination of both. And what that does is that people begin to see your executive as a thought leader. People begin to see your executive as someone that is a credible voice for that sector, and then they are recognized, and that opens doors. And as doors are opening for the executive, remember, it has a ripple effect on the organization. So you think in that way for a thought leadership strategy. It's how do we position this executive as a credible voice and authority. And so for you to do this, it means that the executive actually needs to have strong and good expertise within that subject matter area. Then you have a social media strategy where you say, look, we're just going to go only digital, heavily relying on sharing and amplifying content about the executive on digital social media platforms. All of these pros and cons, but again, what you realize when you're doing executive communications is there's no one size fits all. You have to really think about the unique context. You have to think about the executive, what works best for that particular scenario, what are we trying to achieve. Very, very important. You might find that maybe at the beginning it's not a great idea for the executive to be going on events, to be going on media platforms, and that's okay. The final one is event and media strategy. So this centers around leveraging third-party platforms to promote the executive's voice and content. And so you have media features, speaking engagement, platform profiling. So you have people sharing about the executive, profiling that executive on different platforms. So it's very third party reliant, and which is why if you're going to do this strategy, your messaging, because they are the ones distributing, so you must make sure that the messaging is very, very solid, and you have to be on top of that narrative. Thought leadership and social media allows you to be in control, fully in control of the narrative that you're pushing out, while the third party strategy is, yeah, you can send out the messaging, but it's their platform. You don't wake up now and you see something, you're like, this is not what I'm meant to be seeing. So those are the top three. There are others, but those usually for executives, those are the top three and safe and most professional strategies that you want to adopt. Step 6, decide on content format and channels. This is where you then narrow down on the kind of content that needs to be created. Again, please, the choice of your content format, let it be backed by data. Don't say, everybody now is setting ring lights and recording podcasts. So, dear executive, we're going to record your own podcast. Why? Are you sure that that would work? Have you determined whether it is the best thing for your executive to do? Is it needed? What is your executive going to say differently? You need data. Is this something that our executive should do? Because everybody is doing it does not mean the executive should be doing it. This is not about trends. This is about results. This is about the outcomes you want to see. This is about the vision, what it is that we're trying to achieve. So there are a mix of content formats that executives can use. So they can have the short text posts, which you have like a LinkedIn post, for example, quick insights, reflections, long form posts, blogs, opinion pieces in a newspaper. For deeper thought leadership, so they are deep diving into a policy area or deep diving into a particular theme or topic. Then you have videos you can use for event clips, leadership messaging, pictures, behind the scene moments, use it to document events, interactions. Video and pictures really helps in terms of boosting engagement and humanizing that leader. Infographics for data driven insights, again, just to even make the content more visually appealing. Then you have articles for more formal thought leadership. So those are some of the content formats you may choose to explore. Then once you've identified your content format, you want to identify the channels. So you select channels and platforms that will be most effective and suitable for the executive's message and content. So sometimes people will say, I want to put my executive on TikTok. And then I'm looking at the personality of the executive and I'm like, why? Why do you want to do TikTok, right? So LinkedIn, all the executives should have LinkedIn. Now, if you want to now top it up with other platforms, that then depends on the executive personality, the kind of content, the audience you're trying to reach on those platforms. So think about that very well. Bear in mind their preferences and proclivities. Again, make sure that it's aligned to their strength and what it is they're comfortable with. Now, you can stretch them outside of their comfort zone. So, for example, an executive may be like, I don't want to be on X. X is too toxic. And maybe they need to be on X for whatever reason that maybe data has proven that they need to be on X. You now need to make them comfortable about being on X. You now need to decide on a strategy that allows them to engage safely on X, taking in consideration their fears and concerns. So don't set your executive up to fail by putting them on a platform they are not ready for, or putting them on one that will amplify their weaknesses. Very, very, very important when you're choosing the channels. And whatever channel you choose, please ensure your executive is prepared and ready to engage on that platform. The reality is that for most of you, you will be the one managing the platform. You'll be the one managing LinkedIn. You'll be the one managing the content that goes out. However, if this executive one day decides that they want to manage their own post, or you want to put them, you're pitching them to speak at an event, you're pitching them to speak at a media platform, please, please, please make sure that they are absolutely ready. Make sure that they're saying the right things. If they want to engage on, maybe they say, okay, I want to be managing my own X account, please have a document where the do's and don'ts of engaging on X, it has to be that thorough. Very, very important, because if this backfires, it has a ripple effect on the organization. Then step 7, we're looking at sequencing and distribution. How would you distribute the content that you create? So imagine if you're creating videos, you have your long form articles, you have the things you want to send to blogs. This is where having a content calendar is very, very important to plan and publish your executives' content. And that way also helps you to show them holistically, this is what we're going to be doing this week or this month. And then you can have a plan as to this is what we will put on this platform, we'll put this on your blog, we'll put this in the media. And then the key questions you should be answering is, how will the content be posted on the executive owned channel? So if they're going to have their own blog, their LinkedIn page, what content will be shared to third party or industry media? So sometimes you may need to differentiate so that you're not posting exactly the same things. Imagine that you send something to the Guardian, for example. Do you want to post exactly the same thing on the executive's website, or you will repurpose that content? And it's important to be able to do repurposing. So your executive, for example, goes to speak at an event. How do you turn that content to a carousel post with bite-sized sound bites? And then how do we convert that to video content? Just again, thinking about how to maybe lengthen or stretch the value of that one speaking engagement. That's why I like speaking engagement, because once you do a speaking engagement, the footage, there's so much that you can do with it, right? And then you think about in what order and sequence will content be shared. And finally, step 8, establish your metrics for success. Again, we have to work with KPIs and metrics. So you have to define the outcomes you want to see, and these outcomes you define it from the beginning when you're setting your objectives, and then you set the KPIs and metrics that you will measure. So are we looking at media sentiment, share of voice, your social media engagement, internal trust scores, employee feedback, thought leadership reach? Are we going to measure comments, engagement level, number of speaking engagement requests? So you can go as granular as possible depending on what's important to you with regards to the outcomes that you want to see. So I'm going to show you how this comes together in the templates that you can then edit and tweak for your own particular executive. Okay, so here's what the template looks like. Like I said, I will put the link. It's a Google Doc, and you'll be able to, so once you open it and you go to download, you'll just be able to download it as MS Word or PDF. I advise that you download it as MS Word so that you can tweak it. So you start the strategy overview, and this is what you typically submit to your executive after you put everything together. This document is what you will submit. So a short summary of the purpose, scope, and expected outcomes of the executive communications plan. What's the purpose of the strategy? So here's an example. This strategy aims to position the CEO as a leading voice on digital transformation in Africa while strengthening internal trust and visibility over the next 12 months. So that's an example. Key priorities: increase visibility, improve internal communication, build thought leadership, enhance media relationships. Time frame from January to December 2026. Expected outcomes: stronger CEO reputation, improved employee engagement, increased positive media coverage, clear leadership narrative. So you can see and the thing you need to know about communicating with executives, and this is going to be in module 4. How do you work successfully with an executive? They need to be able to see top line, right? So this document can be, if I don't advise it to be more than 10 pages, even long, but when they open it, your executive summary or overview needs to give them the full details. So imagine this already communicates very powerfully, and then they now can decide how deep they want to go into the details. So remember, this is step 1, the executive profiling and audit. Here is where you input the key details about the executive's leadership style, personality, communication strengths, weaknesses and preferences, review of their current visibility, media presence, social media footprint, internal reputation, past communication. You do all of that work here, and then you document it. So you can put the name, role, leadership style. So Mr. Michael, for example, he has a transformational visionary leadership, personality traits, communication strength, strategic thinker, concise and factual, weaknesses, lack of connection, uses technical jargon. And this is something that is very, very important, because if you have an executive that they speak a lot of technical jargon and you want them to interface more with non-technical audiences, then they need to be trained, because mentally their brain thinks in technical language. So it takes a bit of training for them to start talking in non-technical language, which is why I keep saying that you have to really understand the executive and then know what is required to get them to where you need them to be. Limited social media presence, so you have preferred channels. I'm not going to go through everything, but at least you document all the things that you're finding in the research that you do, in the audits, reviewing their, if they have a digital footprint. If they don't have, you also note it here. Then you have your objectives, which have to be smart. So you can set 3 to 5 measurable goals aligned with business priorities. And please don't let your goals be too long or your objectives be too long, because it can then become difficult to track. So you can see here, increase CEO visibility in tech policy conversations across Africa within the first quarter, improve internal communication during restructuring to boost trust within 3 months, grow LinkedIn engagement by 40% through consistent thought leadership over a 12-month period, strengthen relationships with key business journalists in 2026. Then you map out your audience list of internal and external audiences, what they care about, how the executive should engage them. So you have the audience. So employees, for example, what are their priorities, what they need to hear, and what are the best channels. Now, I do more granular stakeholder mapping and engagement where I really outline my no feel do. What do I want them to know? What do I want them to feel? What do I want them to do? But this is very, very simple. For those of you that are like, I don't know, this one is work. So very simple. So employees, job security, because remember, executive communication is not just for external, it's for internal as well. Job security, clarity, leadership direction. This is the messaging, and then town halls, internal emails. So you have customers or clients, reliability and innovation. We're building solutions that empower your business, customer newsletters. You can even put social media there. Again, this is still will be tied to the organization's objective, but you then decide what is the theme, what is the focus for this particular executive in terms of messaging, themes, and topics. So I will not go through the rest. So regulators, media, investors. So those are those examples. Then you have the strategy and the theme. So what is the core narrative? So this is how we want the executive to be positioned with regards to Africa's digital future, innovation, empowering people, responsible leadership. So you already have the themes, right? So everything the executive is going to be talking about, Africa's digital future. We're going to be talking about innovation, empowering people, responsible leadership, and you can do that in different ways. And then you break it down into the content themes and the pillars, innovation, digital transformation, people and culture, sustainability and social impact, economic growth and policy. However, before you go into this, remember this is where you then say, are we doing a thought leadership approach? Are we doing digital only? Are we using events and media? Outline that. Then what is the narrative on that platforms? And then that's when you then break down the content themes and the pillars. But please identify the strategy first. Very important. I think I will actually add that here in case somebody just opens this template without watching the video, so that we're very, very clear that this is the approach that we are adopting. Then you have your channels and content format. This is different channels that can be used. So what's here is what each channel can be used for, how frequently you can use it, and you can see here the different content formats. So somebody says, okay, media, what are the content formats we'll use? Interviews, we'll use op-eds. Social media, we're going to be focusing on LinkedIn. You can break it down. Now, the thing with templates is that you don't have to use this as is, but it kind of gives you a guide. And then I love tweaking templates, and that's why for me, I don't have a one size fits all approach when I'm developing strategy. I've done executive communications for a number of executives, and I've not used exactly the same plan or strategy for them because it's uniquely tailored. But at least what a template does is it just gives you the framework in which to now build your own strategy and your plan as well. Then you have your timing and distribution. So your monthly or quarterly content calendar aligned with your messaging pillars and business priorities. So remember the themes, what are the activities, what we'll be doing. Usually your content calendar will be a bit more granular, but this is for example purposes. Then you go to your metrics and your KPIs. So media sentiment, you want it to be 80% positive. How would you measure it? Share of voice, social media engagement, event impact, and all of that. So I hope you found that useful in terms of how to build your executive communication strategy, and then you can use that template to start working. So for those of you that's the task that they've given you, use that template as a starting point, and then walk through the process that I've gone through in this video to develop that strategy for your executive. See you on the next module.